Hello everyone and welcome to today's event, How the Labor Market Can Beat the Odds. We are streaming on YouTube live from Concordia University's fourth space, which is located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. At fourth space, we collaborate with our university community by co-creating engaging activities that activate initiatives and research. As a street-facing public space, experiential learning is a core part of our mandate, and it is a pleasure to welcome this panel discussion on how to create experiential learning opportunities for all students. We are running this event as a live-streamed webinar and welcome your questions in the chat if you're joining by Zoom. And for those of you in the space, please raise your hand, and we will be sure to get a microphone to you. And with that, it is now my pleasure to hand it over to our Concordia President and Vice Chancellor, Graham Carr.
Thanks very much, Jacqueline. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our first panel discussion on experiential learning. And like Jacqueline, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that both campuses of Concordia University are located on unceded Indigenous lands. Nous reconnaissons la nation Kanien'kehá:ka comme gardienne des terres et des eaux sur lesquelles nous nous réunissons aujourd'hui. Tiohtià:ke, ou Montréal, est historiquement connu comme un lieu de rassemblement pour de nombreuses Premières Nations et aujourd'hui une population autochtone diversifiée ainsi que d'autres peuples y résidant. C'est dans le respect des liens avec le passé, le présent et l'avenir que nous reconnaissons les relations continues entre les peuples autochtones et autres personnes de la communauté montréalaise. And I'll just say that we do the territorial acknowledgement on selective occasions at the university, normally those which are externally facing, and we do it, as other Canadian universities do, as one of our responses to the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee. But in the context of today's panel, and I'm going to link back to this in a moment, I think that those calls to action have a particular relevance with regard to future opportunities for Indigenous talent in Canada as well. So on to today's panel. We are, I think, all aware of the reality that economies around the world are struggling with significant labor shortages today. La pénurie de talent, la pénurie de main-d'œuvre, as it's called in Quebec. C'est certainement le cas ici au Québec et il est regrettable peut-être que cette question majeure n'ait pas été davantage discutée dans notre récente élection provinciale. Des facteurs démographiques entrent en jeu. La perturbation majeure qui représente la pandémie a certainement joué un rôle aussi. But then, of course, there's also the age-old challenge of connecting qualified personnel graduating out of post-secondary institutions like ours with the needs of employers. And to help bridge that gap, Concordia has, for many decades now, made that connection part of our academic programs. And it's been so successful that in August, we made a new commitment on that front. And the new commitment is that beginning with the entering undergraduate class this September at Concordia University, every single incoming undergraduate student at Concordia will have the opportunity for a course-based experiential learning opportunity as part of their program. And our goal is to double that offer so that by 24-25, the 50th anniversary of the university, students will have two such opportunities, whether that's through work-integrated learning, whether it's through study abroad, research, community-based, or co-curricular experience. We want that opportunity to be available to all of our incoming students. C'est un objectif ambitieux, surtout pour une université de notre taille, mais compte tenu des partenariats que nous avons établis déjà et que nous sommes en train de développer, nous sommes très confiants de notre intention d'être non seulement la première université au Québec, mais une des premières au travers du Canada à étendre un tel objectif. Au-delà de l'accès privilégié à une réserve des talents, la grande majorité des employeurs estiment que les étudiants stagiaires renforcent les capacités de leur organisation. And work-study students, we know, bring new ideas, they bring fresh energy, they bring technology skills, digital experience or expertise, and in the case of Concordia, cultural and linguistic diversity to the job markets that they enter. So in today's panel, we want to discuss the benefits of creating a more inclusive workforce, discuss the benefits for employers and students of paid internships or work-integrated learning in particular, and delve into greater detail about the experiences both of employers and students to help determine some of the key success factors in developing work-integrated learning placements, commonly known as WIL. So let me now introduce our panelists today, beginning on my left with Sunny Perron. Sunny is the president of Shared Services Canada, part of the federal government. And we're also very fortunate at Concordia. The federal government runs a senior civil service champion program. And for a few years now, Sunny has been Concordia University's civil service champion. So welcome, Sunny, and thank you for making the trip from Ottawa today. Also coming down the 417 earlier today, or late last evening, was Maria Giamarco, who is the senior lead for R&D focused on equitable learner pathways at the Business and Higher Education Roundtable, also known as BHAIR. If you're reading the sign here, if you can see it, the word business is left off, but it is the Business and Higher Education Roundtable, but we all know of it as BHAIR. And to my left, a fellow historian, Simon Hogg from Concordia University's Department of History, and a graduate of the Beat the Odds program. And to Simon's right is Francis Baillet. Francis is the Vice President for Corporate Affairs of Ubisoft. He's also, I think I can say, a proud Concordia graduate and currently a member of our Board of Governors, so somebody who gives back to the university in many, many respects. And finally, Jason Toney, who is the publisher of Black Rose Books here in Montreal and hired a Beat the Odds student earlier this year. So I want you to please join me in welcoming and thanking all our panelists for being here today. Now I'm gonna ask questions in English, but the panelists know that they're free to speak in French or English in their answers, and we'll just go back and forth and see how we end up. Sunny, I'm gonna begin with you. Canada needs a labor market that allows and encourages all people of working age to participate in paid work and provide a framework for their growth and development. But we know that groups such as women and young mothers or students with disabilities often don't get as many opportunities in many sectors and economies. And I guess this is where I want to come back to the territorial acknowledgement, because we also know that Indigenous graduates and Indigenous students often face the similar challenges. And it seems that effectively mobilizing the talents and resources of these groups would allow them to more fully participate and benefit from driving economic growth, and that would not only benefit individuals, but benefit society as a whole. So I wanted to begin with you by asking about the role of the federal government in this, and whether the government of Canada has particular goals in mind that it's identified in terms of trying to create a more inclusive workforce participation. And how do you see those objectives in terms of the goal of increasing the employment rate? And finally, where does higher education fit into that equation?
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the invitation first. I'm
Pleasure.
really glad to be here. Très content d'être avec vous tous aujourd'hui. This is a loaded question. First, I have to say that we have been steady focus on diversity and inclusion for many years, but I think we have refined in the federal government our thinking about it in the last few years. Acknowledging that despite the effort to increase representation, some segment of the population were totally disadvantaged. And when we talk about systemic discrimination, things that we don't see that are there, that makes, like, we are achieving progress on diversity and more inclusion from visible minority, different groups. But there is some that do not progress. They stay at lower level. The progression is not good. So less than 2 years ago, the clerk of the Privy Council issued a challenge to all departments, including deputy ministers, to come with a plan. We need to fix this, and we need to go further. You need to study your system of staffing classification to identify the barrier, because there is some groups that are disadvantaged. There is some department that's struggling. In my department, for example, 3-4 years ago, there was one woman at the management table. So there was a bunch of assistant deputy minister and one woman there. Now we have achieved parity. So in technology, sometimes the challenges are different. So each organization was called by the clerks to come with your plan, your own reality. I'm in the technology area, so someplace we were doing pretty well on diversity, folks feel included. But in some place, when we look at the detail, we were not doing so good. So our representation, for example, from Black people into senior rank was lower than expected, while we have a really good number on visible minority in general. But there is a subgroup that was totally disadvantaged. Women was a challenge. People with disability was a challenge. So we were lower than the employment market. We even have to set for ourselves like target above the employment market, because if you start to set your target too low, then you don't achieve it. So it's very important. And why it's important, I think it's just because we have to be representative of the society we are serving, and this is true at Shared Service Canada and in all the other federal departments, and I think in all organizations we should strive for this. But also, because when you don't have a diversified workforce, you don't pay attention to some issue. And if you have an open dialogue within your organization and you have a diversified workforce that represents all the segment, you have less chance to miss things that are very important. And my goal personally is for people to feel welcome in the place we work. They should be excited because I'm one of the biggest technology employer in Canada. I have the biggest network, some of the biggest data centers. There is tools, there is toys, but they should be excited to come because they have, everybody feel that they have a place. They can be indigenous, present their indigeneity in the organization and see that as a value. Folks could be part of some specific community and have a place to influence the workplace and show it up. So feeling welcome in the organization. So it's why we have also created a number of networks. We support them with their own plan, not my plan, their plan to advance this in. And we are also offering training, because to be good is, to achieve this objective is not only to have the right number of people in. They need to see that they can express themselves and influence their colleagues that may not be in from one of these segments. So having like blanket exercise to sensitize, to get people sensitive to the history of Indigenous people in Canada. Having a strong participation in pride activities, so to show that we support and welcome members of the LGBTQ plus community. Having this at all ranks, senior level, lower level, and also in our entry. We have targets in all regions about increasing representation that our manager need to account for, need to report to me twice a year. So what are you doing? How are you doing with your numbers? What are you doing in terms of involving yourself? What are you doing to make sure that people feel that they have a place to be and deal with some of the issue? The last point I would say, we have also undertaken a review of our staffing process, because some tools are broken. We are all about merit, your experience, your knowledge, your education, but this is good. But we are missing, and it seems that some, despite they have all the right things, do not succeed like the other. There has to be something broken somewhere, and we have to make some of these adjustments. Otherwise, we track people, we create a good context, but we do not present the right picture because they may have difficulty to progress. And I want to see more progression. Folks feel that if they come to work at Shared Service Canada or in any federal department, they have a chance to progress, and they have a chance to see that their difference will be acknowledged, will be supported, and will be in that value in the organization. So, but we are not there. It's a long shot, and I will likely never declare that we are done with this. It's a permanent preoccupation we have to have, otherwise we are going to slip back to where we were. I'm not happy, for example, of how we are accommodating people with disability. While we've put the program in place, still people said it takes too long. It's really difficult. It's very bureaucratic. Well, if you look in the face of the requests we are getting, sometimes they are very reasonable. That's why are we so slow to deal with this? So there's some cultural element that we have to be persistent and fix, because everybody should feel welcome and supportive in the organization. I have target to increase representation. I have target to increase number of students coming in, and this is our future. This is the people that will run this organization in the future, so we need to invest a lot in this. So I'm happy that we have a chance to discuss. I'm going to stop there because I can talk very long and you will all fall asleep.
Well, thanks, Sonny. I mean, you really put your finger on a number of essential issues that I think all large organizations, whether in government or whether it's in higher education or the private sector, struggle with, that gap between who we are and who we want to be, and how much of that is historical and cultural, and the mechanisms that we need to put in place to effectively address it. Maria, maybe I can turn to you to build on some of Sonny's observations there, because I think we can say with some degree of certainty that there has been progress in recent years. In Sonny's case, in the Government of Canada, I mean, it's clear that there's been an identification of a problem. That's progress in and of itself, and the setting of targets to try and address it. But we also know that finding work continues to be challenging for many of those individuals who are racialized, who have disabilities, who are members of the LGBTQ plus community, basically any equity-seeking group. And if we're going to desperately move forward to improve inclusion, we're gonna need to find successful mechanisms to help us along the way. What do you and what do your colleagues at the Business Higher Education Roundtable see in terms of solutions that organizations could put in practice immediately to help address some of these challenging realities?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question, a big question. But first, I'll say thank you to Graham, to Concordia for having us here today. I'm very proud to represent BHER on this panel. And a huge congrats to Concordia as well on your new goal. You know, we're proud supporters at BHER of the Beat the Odds program and are looking forward to continued relationship there. I'll start answering this question by stepping back with a bit of context on BHER, and then I'll connect things back to why we're here, why we're answering this question today. So BHER is a national nonprofit organization with a mandate to address some of the most pressing skills, talent, and innovation challenges faced by post-secondaries and employers across Canada. And we've operationalized this mandate through three main functions, or sort of main arms of our organization, that all sort of support and inform each other. The first is we connect and we convene. So we bring together our members, which are post-secondaries and large businesses from across Canada, along with other actors in the skills and talent ecosystem, to work together on solving these challenges. And the other two arms are about making that problem solving happen. We've got our R&D shop, so my portfolio of work specifically on equitable and inclusive pathways is also where a lot of the work I'll be speaking to today comes from, but we've got much more than that. And then of course there's also our flagship initiative, which is our WILL program, our Work Integrated Learning program, through which we fund and support WILL delivery partners to bring more high quality WILL opportunities to post-secondary students across Canada, to really help build the capacity of the WILL ecosystem. And I'll dig more into that a little bit later in the conversation. But back to this question of addressing the challenges at hand, the sort of dire realities of experiential learning and work integrated learning. We believe and we know WILL to also be a solution to these challenges. WILL can be a great equalizer, bridging and building pathways for students from equity deserving communities. But we need to improve the system still, right? These challenges still exist within the WILL ecosystem as well. It's not just in the workplace at large. And it's important to note also that at BHER, we too are focused on providing WILL to all students across Canada. We are 100% behind this 100% WILL goal. We were big champions for that in the early days. But we also know that the closer we get to that 100%, the harder things can get. So closing in on that 100% is really about creating WILLs where they haven't traditionally existed, and getting WILLs to the students who have the hardest time accessing them in the first place. And so for us, and we know for Concordia as well, though, it's not just about the numbers, right? It's about the quality of experience as well. And is that experience inclusive? Does it lead to strong outcomes? And this is hard work, right? It's hard for post-secondaries, it's hard for employers. You know, we're trying to fix these systems that were built on exclusion, and that's not an easy job, of course. So we know we have our work cut out for us, but you know, what can we do about this? That's really, you know, the meat of this question. And I'll talk about what we've started doing to try and figure some of this out. So, you know, in our work at Beaker, we've talked to hundreds of employers and practitioners over the last few years about WIL, including their desire to address these challenges and the help that they need in doing that. But what was missing from these conversations was student voices, so student perspectives on their own lived experiences. And these voices are critical for building inclusive solutions. Students know what they need, they know better than anyone else, their lived experiences and the changes that they need to see happen, you know, from accessing wills all the way through to the experiences themselves. And in many ways, they're the key. We just need to listen. And that's why it's so great to see Simone on this panel here today. So we went and we talked to these students about these very experiences. We hosted a series of cross-Canada roundtables and spoke to nearly 100 students from across the country, across programs, across equity-deserving communities. And you know, this was no easy feat, right? It's difficult to build connections with students and to talk about sensitive topics. So, but many are also very keen for that outlet to share their stories and to share their perspectives and to speak up and advocate. And we're very grateful for the students who lent us their time and their insights. And this is also great timing for today's panel because we actually have a series of resources built out of these roundtables. They're developed for WIL practitioners, WIL employers, to help equip, you know, the actors with the power to change the system, to address these challenges, to help them actually make those changes. And these resources are launching very soon, in the next couple of weeks actually, and they'll be available on our WIL hub. And I just want to say a quick shout out to Dr. Cynthia Kuma, who's in the audience here, and she played a huge role in making these resources happen. So thank you, Cynthia. And I'll quickly just give a highlight reel of what we heard. We talked to students about the barriers that they face in the WIL ecosystem. And we talked about barriers because a deeper understanding of these barriers is really critical to developing solutions, of course, right? We need to make sure that our solutions that we're focused on reflect priority barriers that students are facing. So just, you know, a quick highlight reel of some of those barriers. You know, many students from equity-deserving communities just aren't aware of the opportunities that are out there for them. There's, you know, a lack of understanding of how to navigate that system, and there's a lot of students that just don't see themselves in WIL opportunities. They don't see them as something for them or something that, you know, they could belong in or that, you know, that they'd be accepted for and whatnot. And you know, there's a lot of WIL programs, especially more traditional WIL programming, that often doesn't take into account the lived realities and sort of disproportionate responsibilities that many students from equity-deserving communities might have, whether that's, you know, caretaker roles, financial responsibilities, and sort of the lack of flexibility in a lot of WIL programming means that there's little access or students from equity-deserving communities can't even consider WIL as something that they can build into their day-to-day. Of course, there's persistent discrimination, racism, biased treatment, a lack of representation in supervisors and mentors. And a lot of these barriers, including things like the digital divide, the lack of social capital that many students from equity-deserving communities face, were exacerbated throughout the pandemic as well. So we have to consider that layer of COVID impact in this conversation as well. So we focused on the barriers, but we also focused on the needs, the opportunities, and the enablers for change, right? So the response to those barriers. And again, quick high level on some of those priority action items that we heard from students were around, you know, inclusive engagement. So building equity, diversity and inclusion practices into, you know, communications, into connecting and building relationships with students, with the communities that they're a part of, really meaningful connections, not just, you know, putting an EDI disclaimer in a WIL ad and hoping that students apply and see themselves in that. There's all sorts of solutions around debiasing and centering EDI in approaches to recruitment, in onboarding processes, in performance assessment. Students also want continued opportunities for virtual and hybrid work that can continue to make WILs more accessible, whether from a financial perspective or a disability perspective. And across a lot of what we heard, what really came through was the need to get everyone involved in WIL to adopt a whole of WIL EDI mindset. And this involves, connectivity and mutual support between post-secondaries and will employers, integrated, and a continuation of the support that students receive on campus. And I will say, we heard from a lot of students that they receive fantastic support on campuses, but sometimes or I should say a lot of the time that support is lost when they enter the workplace. So having that continued support from campus to the workplace and back again is really important. But a shout out to the post-secondaries for their great work there. And they also really want will supervisors that lead with empathy, understanding, open communication, and proactive responses to their needs. And so, really these conversations that we had with students highlight, some of the things that we can focus on moving forward, but really what it requires is us working together, right? It requires post-secondaries, employers, and intermediaries like BHER working together on these challenges. We can't do things independently. And this work really comes full circle to BHER's mandate and how we strive to help make change happen. And addressing these challenges in the will ecosystem is a major priority for us. And what really matters in this is, again, talking to people, listening to people, and then doing something about it. And for us, that doing is really about building the capacity of employers and practitioners. So I'll leave it there.
So thanks, Maria. I mean, I think, again, you've identified a lot of major challenges that organizations face, and it is about capacity building, but it's also about sharing best practices and understanding what organizations can do to try to address systemic barriers and develop programs and develop supports that enable inclusivity to really happen for students who may otherwise be marginalized. And that brings me to a program that our Experiential Learning Office created in 2020 to try to address some of these barriers. And it's a program called Beat the Odds. And this was a program that's designed to eliminate some of the barriers that prevent students who have reduced opportunities from accessing the workforce. And I want to turn to Francis, Jason, and Simon on this, about this point in this program in particular, because we'd like to believe that it's one tool, but it's only one tool, that can help better address the equity challenge that I think we're all concerned to tackle. So Francis, maybe I'm going to begin with you. Yes, universities are a great source of talent for industry. There's no shortage of university graduates working at Ubisoft. And you were once a co-op student here at Concordia, and I think you know the advantages that provided to you. But today, both Ubisoft as a company and you personally are very generous donors to the Beat the Odds program. And I guess my first question for you is, well, why was that program important to you in particular?
Well, you know me for some time now, so you know that in life you have two approaches when there's a problem. You can either complain or you can have a plan. And so what I love about Concordia is that you guys have a plan. And so you set up your new plan to offer experiential learning to every undergraduate next year. And I heard two opportunities in 2025, so I'll hold you to that. But that's a plan. And it's a great plan because you will address, for sure, the labor shortage with this plan. You also have the federal government coming up with this test where you'll be offering foreign students on students' visa to extend beyond 20 hours of work per week and still be eligible for the visa. So that's part of the plan as well. And it's going to help Concordia as well because you have a lot of foreign students here. But I think Beat the Odds is like the last brick on the wall that you needed to have the full plan ready. And that addresses not only the labor shortage problem, but the equity problem as well. And so I'm so glad that I was able to contribute to the program because I believe in it. I'm glad that you attracted more contributors, RBC and BHER. So again, congratulations for the program. It's really, really important. It's part of the plan. It's a very important brick to support the plan.
And why do you think it's that important brick? What does it do in particular that helps alleviate the labor shortage on the one hand and allow businesses or enterprises perhaps to tap into a pool of talent that they haven't really considered previously?
Absolutely. I think it will help address the problem of labor shortage for sure. But employers need to also consider the inclusion problem. And so this is something Sony and Maria touched on. But you'll hear a lot of HR and leadership teams around the world, and especially here in Quebec, wanting to become, employer of choice. So that's great surveys. But you actually survey your mass employees. That leads to being best employer. But I suggest some employers have a blind spot. And the blind spot is that they may not be the best employers for all of their community. And so I think if you start to think about that, you start to think about inclusion challenges. So at Ubisoft, we had that blind spot. We went to get expertise and set up ERGs, so Employee Resource Group, for those who may not be aware of the acronym. So those employees resource group allows us to actually identify people from underserved, underrepresented community, and these people will lead and create their own ERGs. So today we have 7 ERGs, ranging from neurodiversity to LGBTQ, to women and non-binary, to Black people, to Latino American, Asian. And so these groups will help us become an ambassador, just as Sony was saying, attract people from those underrepresented community because they now have the capacity to project themselves because we have those ambassadors working under the ERG. Mm-hmm. And they will not only become ambassador, but they will also help us identify further blind spot. How can we make sure that we create the right environment so that every group of people can thrive and succeed? And so that's, I believe, the inclusion challenge that we need to make sure we address also. Tapping into the talent for sure, but making sure that everybody can thrive and succeed.
So that's really interesting, and of course, kudos to Ubisoft for that initiative. You're a large employer. You have what, 5,000?
5,000 in Quebec, 20,000 so in the world.
In the world. So that's you're operating at a particular scale. I guess one of the questions I have is so there's a capacity opportunity for you to address those needs because of your scale. But I wonder if you have any thoughts about how this might create a different set of circumstances for smaller organizations, for SMEs or community organizations that don't necessarily have the same resource base.
Well, that's a great question because this is exactly why Beat the Odds is such a great program. Most people will think of Beat the Odds as a great way to recruit people from underserved community. But Beat the Odds is also a great way for community-based organization, as an example, to get that ERG type expertise from Beat the Odds. So they will help you as a smaller employer or a community-based organization to set up the right conditions to make sure you offer this opportunity to everybody coming up from the Beat the Odds program. I'm sure Simon will touch base on that, but you need to see Beat the Odds as your expert, not only to provide you with expertise, but also to make sure that this expertise feel really included as part of your group.
Great, that's a terrific answer and a great segue maybe to you, Jason, because you're the publisher at Black Rose Books. Black Rose Books has been an institution in Montreal for a long time as a major publisher. It's a smaller medium enterprise, and you reached out and decided to recruit through the Beat the Odds program. I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what impact that made within your organization, within your company.
I just looked over and made eye contact with a student I worked with in the program, and it had a dramatic impact on what we do. Whereas you're working at the scale of about 5,000 in Quebec, we're about 5. So it's a bit different, but the impact was, it was extraordinary. It went way beyond our expectations, and it continues to do that today, we're again currently working with another BTO student. And the skills that the students bring to the table from the backgrounds that BTO attracts have just filled in all kinds of blind spots that I didn't anticipate us even having. But the ability to just pick things up at a speed that's difficult for some of the other people I work with who are much older, who struggle with some of the technological advances happening in my field of publishing, was very helpful. So I would say the impact for us was major, especially at a time where we're talking about labor shortages. In the publishing industry in particular, and being an English language publisher in Quebec, there's always been a struggle with attracting talent. Many of the brightest graduates from various publishing programs around Canada end up in the English publishing world in Toronto. So there's always been a challenge in Montreal, but especially with the labor shortages we're seeing now, we have Toronto-based publishers reaching out to me asking if I know of anybody who can fill X, Y, or Z role that they're trying to fill right now. So it's a particularly difficult situation, and for an independent publisher to develop talent, which we're often called on to do, as you know, often we're community-based organizations. We're developing people in this world where they might not have had specific skills. It's a huge investment, and something like Beat the Odds has been extremely helpful in helping us defer the cost of the investment of time and labor and supervision to really try to develop some talent. So we've been really lucky to be a part of the program, and I think the impact is not abstract. It's very concrete for us. Yeah, we had a similar experience with the co-op program, but Beat the Odds, I would say, has been particularly useful for us, definitely.
And I'm interested also, Jason, that going back to something Maria said about, you know, the challenge of onboarding or creating that welcoming environment. And both Sunny and Francis have talked about some of the strategies that their organizations are doing. But you're a small organization. Has it forced you to think differently about that onboarding practice, about how you integrate people into the business?
Absolutely. I think, in my experience, the BTO program in particular provides a lot of materials to the employer to help make this a more fluid process. So I know the first time we did this, I was given all kinds of materials to work with, and there were many conversations about what working with a student would look like in this particular context. And those conversations were helpful in generating all the materials we needed for onboarding. And our second go around, it was much easier. And I think we see that process of onboarding a bit differently. And I think the result has been a more inclusive process, a process that's better for us and for the employee or intern, whatever it may be. So I certainly think that things have changed pretty fundamentally in that sense in what we do. I mean, again, we're 5 people, we're not bringing new employees in constantly, but working with students in particular, it's become a much easier, more fluid process. And we've even kind of shared the responsibility amongst our team to kind of teach everyone these skills and this experience on our end. So yeah, I think there's been a definite impact in the onboarding and integration process.
And just listening to you, you know, I think it really emphasizes that the success of this program is all about relationships, right? Because it's the relationship between the university, between the employer, between the students themselves. And over time, you know, you develop a community of practice and you learn from experience what works and what doesn't work. And so other employers who maybe, I don't want to put you on the spot, but other employers out there who may be thinking about going down this pathway, you know, it's useful to have a pool of other entrepreneurs who've already been down there, other employers who've already been down that road to say, yeah, this worked for us, this wasn't so good.
Yeah, I would even just add that when we started, I had pretty limited expectations of what would get done by students who are balancing, you know, school and trying to do this work. And I thought it would be some data entry and some basic work in that sense. It's not been that at all. Our whole metadata system was overhauled. We have a whole new brand kit developed. And the list goes on, especially in the context of technology. But we've seen an extraordinary contribution by the students who have, you know, I was a student in an experiential learning program when I was in university, so I really appreciate and am the product of this kind of education. And I've seen with the students I've worked on use these experiences in new contexts that they've moved on to, or new studies that they're moving into, bringing the lessons they learned and working in the publishing world or whatever it may be into the next thing they do. So I think it's, from the employer perspective, it's extraordinarily useful, and from the student perspective, I think it will just make the students at Concordia that much more flexible and adaptive. So I think it's a win for all, definitely.
Well, that's a great pathway to turn to the student experience. Simon, so you're in your third year in history here at Concordia, and you did a Beat the Odds internship as an archivist with the Federation of Home and School Associations, and I don't want to embarrass you except in a positive way, but your employer was thrilled to have you working with the organization. So congratulations on that. I hear that you're also an adaptive sailor, a devourer of podcasts, and an advocate for disability rights. So thank you for making the time to be here with us this morning. How do you think, from your experience, that students can make, and Jason's talked a bit about this, but how, from what you saw, from what you experienced, how do you think that students themselves make an impact, make a difference in the organizations for which they work? What do you feel like you're bringing to the table?
Well, as a student, what I thought I was bringing to the table was my academic skills from my university career. So as an archivist and as a history student, those two tasks are very interchangeable. So I was bringing a lot of the skills I already had as a history student to the table as an archivist, and I was able to work on those skills. But at the same time, while providing these skills to the organization, I was getting additional skills. So I was able to write an article. I learned to be a better time manager, be more adaptable. So I would say students are motivated to work, and that's one of the aspects they bring to the table. And we have a unique voice that employers benefit greatly from by having students working for them.
And maybe let me just follow up on that a little bit, because when you signed up for the Beat the Odds program, what were some of the practices that the program had developed that you found particularly helpful for students? And I guess the other part of that is, you know, are there things that you think are missing that we could more successfully provide support for students?
Well, to begin, I feel like the program had a good application process. It wasn't too difficult to apply. It was very straightforward. I didn't have any trouble applying, so that was one good aspect of it. But then as everything started to roll and I was getting interviewed for different positions, and they were asking what kind of skills I would be interested in, the coordinators were very good. They were doing check-ins. They were making sure that your work was related to your field of studies, but also things that interest you. So for example, in my interview process, I had indicated I wanted to learn how nonprofit organizations work. So I learned a lot about how that works. For example, I attended board meetings. I got to sit on the board meetings, participate, write some reports. Then I would just say the coordinators also did a good job. They would do weekly or monthly check-ins with the students. And I thought that was good, especially during COVID, as we were kind of starting to return to in person. It was good to have somebody to talk to, because it's not always, it wasn't always that easy during the pandemic to see people. So that was one experience. And at the same time, those check-ins helped my mental health, and I believe other students' mental health, because we had somebody checking in with us. And it was good also because the coordinators would tell us that their experiences as students themselves in the past. So that was good to know somebody was there to support you and knows what it's like to be a student and how sometimes it can be stressful. So it was good, and it helped me, I feel like, become a better employee.
Great. And in terms of the your relationship with the Federation of Home and School Associations, so I'm not sure whether they had recruited a Beat the Odds student before, or whether you were the first student. But how did you find that relationship in terms of, because I'm sure it was learning on both sides, in terms of learning on the part of the employer how to best support student interns, both from the moment that you were onboarded, but also over the time period. And of course, as you pointed out, this was also happening during the very peculiar context of COVID. So we were all in adaptation mode at that point.
Well, as you said, it was a learning opportunity both for me and the employer. I know that it was a learning process for them to recognize that I needed certain accommodations. So for example, I met with them ahead of time before I started my contract to figure out what would need to be moved in the office space so I could get around easily in my wheelchair. For example, we had to figure out on the floor where I was working, there was no accessible washroom, but luckily elsewhere in the building there was an accessible washroom. So I would say it's important for employers to maybe visit, especially if you're working with a disabled student, to see what accommodations you might need to provide, because oftentimes it might not be obvious to someone who doesn't have a disability, but to the student who has the lived experience of being disabled, we can tell you what we might need. So I would say that's important to learn. But at the same time, I also learned how to interact with your boss, how to interact with coworkers. So I thought it was a good opportunity for me to learn those kinds of skills. But at the same time, I feel like I was encouraged to develop all kinds of skills. And as I mentioned before, I got the chance to write an article. I got to write some board reports. So I got a very broad introduction into nonprofit organizations, which is really what I wanted to get out of my experience. And I'm also glad that I got some work experience out of it, and I did a good job, and everyone was happy.
Yeah, and and congratulations. And you know, you just touched on something that Jason talked about as well, and maybe I'm gonna throw it back to you, Sunny. It's about not underestimating the contributions that students can make to the success of the organization, and what is it that students bring. And Sunny, you've always been a keen advocate for hiring university students. Yes, from Concordia, but there are a lot of great universities in the country. Can you talk a little bit about some of the benefits that you've seen in bringing students into the workforce, some of the impact that students may have had on how departments function, how they think about problems, how they identify problems and solutions?
This is, in fact, it brings the level of energy that sometimes we are missing because we get stalled into what we know, what we do. Now we are bringing people that comes from outside that have to learn the place. We'll have observation about the place and we'll question. And when you get questions, sometimes you say, yes, it's a bit odd what we are doing here. So even the question that they're asking is useful to the culture of the organization. And in the last year, we have hired a student ambassador that is connected to Concordia. Nargis is here in the room with us. Right. And of course, she's kind of my checkpoint. So how does this work? What is your perception on that? And Nargis is a PhD graduate. She's with us now as an employee. She decided to stay, so I'm really glad with this. But it's having a place to go and check what it looks like from your perspective. You're a newcomer. Are we onboarding you right? Are we providing you with the right things? Are we keeping you busy so you feel you contribute? And it was a bit funny with Nargis because everybody in the organization knew that she was my pick for this project. We had a process with the university, but this was the ambassador for us. So part of our work was to liaise with the university, but also doing some work internally. So I think the organization was taking care to make sure she was really busy. So I have an assistant deputy minister coming to me and saying, Nargis is doing this and this. So feeling that they have to account. And then I had to tell them and say, this is what I want us to do with all the students. You should have your own sample of students to go and check, how are we doing? Do you feel you contribute? We have created some programs as well, like the Agora Network, which is basically our student ongoing network. So we check with them how they are doing, but also we propose them some challenge so they see more than the job we have to offer into a corner of the organization, so they can contribute to something that's more horizontal and learn about one great value into our organization, and I think it's probably applying in the private sector as well. It's collaboration. You do not achieve anything alone. And we put them into this, say, you will have to learn to collaborate, to put your ideas together and advance the project and deliver on it, get to something. And it gave us like a space to go and check ideas. And we have some time to adjust our works. For example, at Shared Service Canada, we have created an accessibility team. So it's a group of people that look at accessibility requirement for people living with disability. And we were, I think, doing okay with the staff, the permanent staff, but we learned that we were doing really badly with those who are coming to us, work with us for 4 months, 6 months, half a year. Because the time it took to assess and find a way to accommodate, they were already on their way out. So we changed that. So now we have a specific program in this area to deal with the short-term needs, to be ready right away when people come in, even before, say, is there something we can do for you? And not say, oh, because it's not someone that will be with us for 6 years or something like that, we are just not doing anything. This is wrong. And it gives a really bad perception as an employer if you come and you're not getting the support you need. You will not perform at the same level, you will not contribute, and you will leave the place with a really bad perception, my senses of the organization. And I think all of us had some work experience as internship or as employee, and some of them have created who we are in our career because we learn so much. We learn so much about what not to do sometimes. But we have to do that. And even if these students do not stay and do not come back with us, my sense is we are investing in the future of this country, the future of these youth people, the new graduates, and they have to have a great experience. They have to leave the place and say, oh, I was accommodated, I was listened, I had a voice in the organization. I understood what the organization was doing beyond my function. And frankly, sometimes someone just checking with me is, do I feel that well here? Do I contribute? And we need to develop that because it's the way to take care of them, and then they will do this themselves in the future. I think for me, I was exposed to some work experience where I had people taking care of me properly as an employee, as a student, and it helped me to change, to evolve. So we have to invest in this, even if in the short term there is maybe no payout for the business we are in. But frankly, I saw also really great things done by students in the organization. They come with ideas, they come with creativity. I think with what Simon was saying, that his skills, his knowledge, his experience was used right away. And we heard the same thing from Jason, people coming and giving contribution. It's happening. It's happening in all corners of the organization. So it's why I have targets. Each sector needs to engage and have people coming in the organization from university, from college every year. And most of the time, when folks want to stay, they can stay part-time with us when they are going back to school because they are contributing. They know what we are doing, and we find a way to use their skills, their willingness, their energy in the organization. And I think it's changing us, and this is what is great.
Yeah, people on my team have heard me talk about, the privilege of being in a university is it's an evergreen experience, right? Because every year you get thousands of new people coming into the organization. There aren't very many kinds of enterprises where that's true, coming in with curiosity, with skills, with talent, with new ideas, and it's super enriching. Just before I want to pick up on the ambassador program and turn to you, Francis, but I also just want to remind people in the audience virtually that if you have questions or comments that you'd like to add, please put them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll get to them. We're going to leave some time at the end for audience questions. But I want to, Sunny mentioned Nargis as an ambassador at Shared Services. Francis, you've also have an ambassador program at Ubisoft specifically to support underrepresented groups, and can you just tell us a little bit more about the creation of that, how it operates? You alluded to it earlier, but maybe take a little bit more time to fill us in.
Yes, you're referring to the Employee Resource Group, the ERG. So, both Simon and Sony alluded to that. when you manage a large group of people, you manage 8,000 employees at shared services, 5,000 here at Ubisoft, you have all those blind spots. So you need to make sure you cover all angles. And I think what you did is great with your checkpoint. This is exactly the same we're doing with the ERGs. ERGs allow group of underrepresented people to group together and make sure they have a common voice toward the management and make sure they bring up the right topics at the right time when they see a challenge for their own community. But it's not only to raise challenge, it's also to solve them. And I'll give you a very quick example. Our neurodiverse ERG came up with a solution called the Biodex. So obviously when you have neurodiverse challenge, you have interaction challenge with people. So you need to be able to interact with people, and for that, it's great to have a card or a how to interact with me personally. So what is it that Francis Bailly, loves? What is it that I am looking for when you speak to me? If you look at my insight, I'm a red. So what does that mean? I need to see results. Okay, so yes, we can talk about your weekend, but very quickly come down to the solution to the problem I raised last week, right? So, it's important that they know that. And not everybody is equipped to see and to read between the lines. And so with the Biodex, you're allowed as a team member to fill in your card. Who are you and how should I interact with you? And this is something that our neurodiverse team came with by themselves. We never asked for anything. They said, this is a solution, we'll bring that forward. But sometimes you need help as a community. So one other example is our LGBTQ community called Proud Ubisoft that said, listen, your insurance company does not cover cosmetic items for people undergoing a gender affirmation surgery. So maybe you should look into that because for them, it's not cosmetic, it's important. And so we challenge our insurance company. They could not do that as an employee or even as a community, an ERG. They could not call up Manu V and said, we need to work something, but we could. So we now have a change in our insurance document that says if you're undergoing a gender affirmation surgery, we'll cover up to $20,000 of expenses that formerly was perceived as cosmetic. So now it's being covered. So this is another example of how a ERG can work together and with the management of a company to make sure that we create that safe space, that inclusive space for everybody to succeed.
Now my mind's spinning about what our employee benefits program looks like at
I knew you would.
Concordia, but that's a really, really good point. Great example. Simon, Sunny alluded to it earlier, and I think many of us along the way have really benefited from strong mentors and people who've supported us and helped us. But there's also a self-advocacy piece to being successful, and that's a skill that not everybody Francis talked about skills that not everyone has. That's a skill that not everyone has in their toolbox necessarily. And I'm wondering if you can just talk a little bit about your own experience advocating for what you need in the workplace, and how you think that we could, as a university, help more students develop and burnish that skill.
Well, in my case, I believe one of the reasons why I'm such a good self-advocate is my parents have always explained to me my condition, and they've always encouraged me to advocate for my needs. And I feel like this internship, my coordinator also helped me, helped to encourage me to advocate for my needs. But I also think part of it comes down to the fact that as someone with a physical disability, I often have to accommodate because others will not necessarily think about my needs for me. So it's often I have to encourage people to look at the bigger picture and realize like, oh, I can use my legs and walk into this building, but for those who can't, we need to make sure there's a way for them to get in. So I think a way to encourage students to be self-advocates is just speak up for yourself, because no one will do it for you. Nobody can read your mind. So you need to express yourself. If you're struggling with mental health, for example, you need to let your employer know, or your beat the odds coordinator, or whoever. And I think, and additionally, like, part of what was so good with the self-advocacy that I fostered throughout this program was that I was encouraged to express what I'm feeling. If I was really struggling, I was basically told to what resources I could apply to, what could I do to help my situation. So I think it's just, everyone should be able to advocate for yourselves, and it's what comes down to it is it's for your own needs and your own life. If you want a good life, you need to advocate for yourself. And I just think it's something everyone can work on just by seeing the bigger picture, maybe seeing what needs you have. It shouldn't just apply to disability. As everyone ages, your needs are going to change. So it's just to think about the bigger picture and try to advocate for your needs, and that are always changing. So I would say that's my advice.
Terrific advice. Thank you for that. Maria, you mentioned at the outset that BHARE had created this new work integrated learning resource hub. There may be people out there who are interested in knowing, how do we get access to that hub? Where do I find that? How can I take advantage of those resources? I know it's à suivre, it's coming, but can you just provide a little insight into how people will be able to tap into that resource?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the hub does exist right now. The first iteration of the hub is free and available online on our website. So bher.ca/will-hub, you can find everything there. The resources I just spoke to in the earlier question will be coming out there in the coming weeks. But taking a step back first, quick, Graham, your point around sharing best practices, I think, is really important in the context of talking about this hub, and connects back to the capacity building that's really at the heart of this hub. And I think we're really lucky to have employers in the room here who have made progress in these best practices and in sharing these best practices. They're deeper into their EDI journey, as we like to say, and doing things like testing, sharing their success stories and whatnot. A lot of what you all have talked about really resonates with what we heard from students in the roundtables as well, which I think is fantastic. But not all employers are at that stage, of course, right? There's a lot of employers that are struggling with not only EDI specifically, but WIL more generally. A lot of employers have really good intentions, again, whether it's EDI or WIL in general, in building talent pathways to enhance their talent access at their organization. But one of the biggest challenges is sort of the gap between those intentions and then being able to do something about it, or getting started on that journey. And so this is where the hub really comes into play, again, not just when it comes to EDI, but WIL and experiential learning more generally. Like I said earlier, at BHER, through our WIL program, we're not just about funding partners, we're about supporting those partners as well. The part of that is providing tools and resources that practitioners, employers want and need and can find useful. So the hub is all about that, right? And it's about, as we say, exploring in, investing in, and creating quality WIL opportunities. And that's also how the hub is organized. If you go online and check it out. The hub is really for anyone that shares these same goals, right? Anyone involved in creating WIL programming and supporting WIL students in some way, in supervising WIL students. And we built this hub because we really saw a gap in the WIL ecosystem in terms of tools and resources, right? So there really wasn't this national hub that has the sort of range and types of targeted resources, actionable tools and whatnot that we've built out. Of course, there are many incredible resources out there that exist, within post-secondaries, within individual organizations, or perhaps even at the provincial level. But there wasn't really that one-stop shop for, any WIL stakeholder across Canada who might not be plugged into a local WIL community, for example. And so what's really interesting and important about the WIL Hub is the story of how we built it. And I have to give a shout out to Dr. Andrew Beeler here, our director of partnerships and experiential learning, because he really led the charge on this initiative. So these are substantive, first of their kind, evidence-based national WIL resources. And we built them in response to consultations with over 600 stakeholders in the WIL ecosystem across Canada. So practitioners from post-secondaries, from community organizations, and employers from across industries, regions, large companies, SMEs, around what's missing in the will ecosystem, what they need, and what they'd actually use. So they're not only evidence-based, but they actually reflect the voices of the audience that they're built for. And there's different layers or dimensions to these resources. So they're organized by where a practitioner or an employer might be on their will journey. So that's coming back to that explore, invest, create. So whether they're exploring work integrated learning for the first time, just learning what it's all about, what the value is and whatnot. So we've got all these sort of 101 resources for that. Or maybe they're seriously considering investing in wills and want to know what might this look like in their organization, what kind of financial supports are out there for them. So we've got financial resource catalog, an ROI calculator, or maybe they're ready, they're deeper in their journey, they're ready to really focus on enhancing quality will experiences and want to explore different dimensions of what that means and how to do it. So we've got guides and courses and other resources on that too. Another layer, these tools and resources also reflect the range of priorities that we heard about in our consultations. So, the unique needs of SMEs, rural, remote, and northern communities, quality mentorship and performance assessment, and there's connections back to EDI across some of these priorities as well. And these priorities really come through especially on the create side of the hub. So how can we create really high quality will experiences? And they all sort of complement each other in different ways. And it's also about the types of content, the types of tools and resources that we have on the hub. So these aren't just PDF reports, they're action focused, sometimes they're dynamic and interactive. So we have everything from more substantive guides to and backgrounders to checklists, video, modules, and of course, as I mentioned, our will ROI calculator. So we wanted to make sure that these were easy to use, that they were actionable and actually useful, actually what employers and practitioners need in their day-to-day, right? A report on the ROI of will is not nearly as helpful as an actual ROI calculator, of course, right? And finally, the last thing I'll say is the hub is dynamic. So we're constantly adding to it, refining as we build out different priority areas or respond to emerging needs in the will ecosystem. And we want the hub to evolve with the ecosystem itself and remain relevant. So like I mentioned, these new resources I talked about earlier are the latest edition. Just before that, we had some new videos come out on will in rural, remote, and northern communities led by my colleague Steve Hyam. And these reflected voices from those very communities. So check it out, beher.ca/will-hub. Yeah, we've got more in the pipeline to watch out for as well, including strategies for innovative wills, innovative will models. And I'll just say, I didn't say this in the earlier question, but there's a strong tie back to EDI solutions when it comes to innovative will models, so whether that's things like microplacements or shorter time periods, case competitions, these types of different models that aren't just your typical co-curricular experience, your typical co-op and whatnot, and these can provide the type of flexibility and different access points that might be better aligned with the lived realities of equity-deserving communities. Not a silver bullet solution, of course, but is a way to start looking at how we can make will work for everyone. And part of that, too, is also looking at program co-design with students. Anyway, so on that note, I'll end things off by saying we're actually gearing up for our next round of national will consultations. So we hope to see some of you in the audience there, and to help us contribute to solving these challenges that we're all facing when it comes to EDI and the will ecosystem.
Super, thanks, Maria. And for those of you who are joining us virtually, I see that Val Walker has helpfully put in the website if you want the link to the resources. The chat in the chat. The chat's got lots of glowing comments for the panelists. It's time now to flip it to the questions. So if you have questions, please don't hesitate to write them. We're going to turn to the audience in the room here in a minute, but I just maybe a couple of open-ended questions for the whole panel before we turn things over to the audience. And we're the converted, right? We have all of the people who are a part of this panel believe in the value of work-integrated learning. Feel very comfortable about what it can do for students, feel very comfortable about what it can do for employers. But there are undoubtedly employers out there and students out there who are skeptical, nervous, not sure. You know, especially I'm thinking in a small, medium enterprise context, an employer might say, well, I don't have the time and energy and resources to invest in, you know, onboarding somebody for a short period of time, and then they're going to be gone. What are they going to? That's not a good value proposition for me. Or even in a larger organization where, you know, the search is really, you know, the war for talent is there to recruit people on a permanent basis. So I guess my first question for anybody is what advice would you give to employers who might be hesitant about dipping into the student market, whether it's Beat the Odds program or some other program to draw students into their enterprise? Who wants at it? Jason, you want to give it a go?
I saw Francis giving you the mic. Okay, that's what is happening. I mean, I suppose it makes sense for me to respond to this one. Yeah, I wasn't being hyperbolic earlier when I answered, you know, generally this exact question. The impact was real and it was rather immediate in basically every case in which I worked with a student. And even if the internship itself has a definitive end date, as it's been mentioned by some of the other panelists, it need not be the final moment. We're in talks right now about what opportunities we might have for part-time work for the students we're working with now going forward while they're balancing that with school. So certainly there's the possibility of more long-term employment and trying to tailor it to their schedule and their needs. And even in cases where the student moves on, in my experience, we've had ongoing relationships where we're still exchanging ideas and working together in new ways that might not be an employer-employee relationship, but can benefit in other ways. For example, a student who I worked with before is now part of the student government at Concordia. And there are all sorts of opportunities that we're discussing right now of how Black Rose and the student government can work together on events because we're a community-based, you know, nonprofit organization, and there's a lot of crossover. So, you know, on one hand, you can continue the work into the future once you've made that investment. Often it makes sense financially, but beyond that, you know, once these students have this knowledge and this experience, there's all kinds of other opportunities that we see are able to arise. So certainly, I think we can think of it in a more flexible way than just a start and end that necessarily functions that way.
Yeah, that's really interesting about nurturing a relationship and maybe opening up a possibility for other kinds of activities and events that nobody had seen at the outset. So, I think it's your turn to hand the microphone back to Francis and put him on the spot.
Well, you know, I have the chance to sit on a few boards and to be advisor also to smaller companies. And, you know, I think today in the labor shortage situation, you really need to see internship as a great way to see the talent out there. You know, you don't need to commit. If you hire a full-time permanent position, you need to commit, right? It's a long-term relationship you're entering into. If you're going to test a student, an intern, you have this 4 months opportunity to test the capacity of the student with no long-term commitment. What an opportunity. It's fantastic, you know? So why not take advantage of that? And for the student, it's also an opportunity to road test a career, road test an employer. Again, what an opportunity. When I was a co-op student, I started thinking that I was going to be an actuary for an insurance company. I tested this opportunity. I did not like it. So I road tested another opportunity with a pension consulting firm, and I loved it. So imagine the time I saved. Imagine if I had spent 5 years in an insurance company before realizing that I was not fit for that, you know? So on both cases, it's great ways to road test a capacity or road test a career.
Yeah, that's great. That's a really great example. You know, Sonny, you talked about you're having these conversations with your colleagues in the federal civil service all the time. So you're a champion for work integrated learning. What's the message you're trying to convey to the hesitant people when you're?
Yeah, we don't have merit because this has been there for a decade. I think we are doing it more aggressively and more conscientiously right now. But for those who are not in there, is first, I like what Francis says. You're not signing for your life here. It's an experiment, and then you learn from it and you scale up if you believe it's right. And we do that in technology. We start small, we test it, we learn, we adjust, and if it's a good decision, then we scale up. So you don't have to take 10 students. You don't have to go bold in the organization to start with. Start small. But I think what you will learn, and what they will learn, this is what I would tell them, is that if you take the time to do it right, there will be an influence on your organization at the end. And this organization, this is measurable. And what I'm really excited in my organization is when I meet with people and say, oh, you know, I started here as a student and came back at the end of my program, and now, God, you're doing this big thing for us. So if we had not given a good experience, we would not have that person coming back. And maybe it will be the sister, the brother, the friends of this person that will come to us later on because she heard about that, and it will make a difference. I also like when someone comes and says, you know what, I left your department 2 years ago and I came back because this is the place where it's cool to work. It's cool because we, I think, take care of people and we give them a chance to influence the organization. We are not the only one doing this, but I'm really proud when I hear that. So we have to be an attractive place, but we have to give space. And it's really good to start to do it with students. Those who are freshly graduated or will graduate, they can inspire us to do better. And I think we need to hold our manager and our executive accountable to make sure that we give a good experience. It's not always easy. They are sometimes busy, but it's the right investment to make. So holding them accountable. And I really like, so what have you done this year to change the representativity of our organization? What have you done this year to move the marker on for some groups? What have you done this year to staff more people in the region from this diverse group? So, and at the beginning, there was some resistance because it's, oh God, we are red. We are looking at fixing things, doing things, achieving results. I said, this is a result. What have you done there? I'm interested. And if you're telling me you're not doing this, I will be still pleased with your delivery, but I don't maybe not feel that you have the same place in our organization because this is important for us to do. Yeah. So, great. And just want to comment on Simon's response on advocacy. It's a shame if folks have to advocate for themselves and we ask them to advocate again and again and again. We need to find a way to learn once, and when we find a way to be helpful and adjust, we take it from there and not wait for the next person to do exactly the same battle. This is unfair. We are experimenting something that is called the accessibility passport in our organization right now, which is when we know what someone needs to be able to operate well and have a great career with us, let's document it. And this passport will travel with the employee within our department and other departments. So this battle will have to be done again and again. Of course, the situation, the needs may evolve, as Simon said, but at least the initial decision and measure taken to help someone to feel welcome, supported in the organization, this battle should not be made again and again. So we are testing this model right now. And I'm really interested by the example that Francis talked to us about. I think you call that the biodex or something like that. I'm going to call you. I want to see this tool. So thank you.
Yeah, lots of good ideas here to share. Maybe the last question I'll throw out has to do with how we persuade students to take advantage of work integrated learning opportunities. You know, I said at the outset that Concordia has made this huge commitment to that all incoming students will have the opportunity. How do we get them to take the opportunity? And we're talking about thousands of students coming into the university every year. So the opportunity's there. How do you persuade students that this is a good option for them? And I hate to put you on the pressure, on the spot, Simon, but you had to know this was going to start with you.
Well, I would say for other students, if you're unsure about opportunities, I would just say go for it. I was really unsure about applying for the Beat the Odds program, but I'm really glad I did because I got some work experience, but I also just gained more life skills that I can use in the future, in my future careers. And I think while you're in university, it's time to experiment, try out things, because once you get into the workforce, you might not get that opportunity again. So I would say go for it while you're young. You might learn that you might have an idea for a career right now, and you might go into a work experience or experimental learning program, and you'll find out, I actually want to do this instead. Or you find out that, yes, you still want to continue with your current career ambition, but you can do other stuff on the side. So I would say just go for it, even if you're not sure, and you never know about, I guess, what you'll get out of it in the long run. So just go for it and try it out, and if it's not for you, you can decide it's not for you, but I would say go for it, try it out, try new things, and that's what I recommend to do.
And you know, maybe just to build on that, it goes back to something Francis said, because you were in co-op, so you had the opportunity to do multiple stage. This is one of the reasons why we want to create the second opportunity for students as a guarantee in 24-25, because it is an opportunity for students to test drive work in different environments. It is an opportunity for them to develop different skills and experiences. And we also know, I mean, you have the data for sure, Maria, that there's a really there's a causal relationship between work-integrated learning and post-graduation employment opportunities, whether that's with the organizations that have hired students or just because organizations are attracted to students who, among their skill qualifications, not only have academic success factors, but they have experiential success factors too. Okay, I've been planting the seed for a while now that we want some questions from the audience. So this is the moment. Questions, comments, either from people who are here in person in the room or online. Okay, can we need a...
Hi everyone, is this on?
Yes, you are.
Don't worry, you won't get a song. Anyways, hi everyone, I'm Jess. I'm actually one of the coordinators for the Beat the Odds program. So thank you so much, all of you, for being here. And just a comment, Simon, I am so proud of you. I watched you from the interview. You know, we talked about skills you wanted to gain, but one of them was using your voice. And you're here today in front of everyone sharing and advocating for yourself and also for all the other students. So I just want to say I'm so proud of the growth. And that's kind of like a segue to employers as to why you want to be a part of an experiential learning program. It's not just about developing careers and hard skills. You can see by Simon sitting here, you're developing a holistic human being. So when you're committing to a work experience, you're committing to a person. And I think we have to keep that in mind as we move forward. And to all the employers that are here listening, that I've had the pleasure to sit in front of and have debated a work experience, I think there is some hesitancy in the sense of when we're talking about equity-seeking groups to do more harm. And there's an uncertainty of how to be a mentor. So there's an avoidance sometimes. But I want to, as you can see here, there's tons of resources. There's tons of people out there and available that want to start having the conversation. So I think a panel like this, where we have employers speaking, we have students speaking, it just goes to show that people are open and to start having more of those conversations, because that's how we start to change systems. So thank you so much. And Simon, I am so proud. I'm so proud.
Thanks, Jess. And if there are other questions, just while people are formulating their questions, I think, you know, Jess, your comment also reflects the fact that there are three legs to this stool. So there are the employers, there are the students, but it takes staff members also to be dedicated to the work-integrated learning initiatives of our university or any university, and it takes their passion to meet with employers and try to persuade employers that this could be a viable option for them, but also to meet with students and mentor students about how to prepare for that moment when you're going to get an interview and a chance to present yourself. So, other questions at the back? Yes, thank you.
Hi, so my name is Sarah. I'm the manager for the Institute for Cooperative Education. So we're part of this conversation as well. Thank you to everybody who's here. I have a question around ERGs. So Francis, also happy to have you here as a co-op alum. Francis and Sunny, you talked about ERGs and how useful they are. You know, one thing that's important to keep in mind, and I'm sure you guys do, so this is why I'm asking the question, is oftentimes these employees are already overburdened, either societally or personally. You know, they've already taken on an additional charge. They often, you know, put additional pressures on themselves. So how do you ensure, I'm curious to hear how you ensure in your workplaces that these people don't have this as an additional burden. What do you have in place to make sure that they are supported, but not just, you know, not just a name, you know, really, actually, how are they supported? What does this mean for their time and their expectations?
So that's a good question. In our case, we actually allocate half a day of every week to supervise and manage the ERG. So every director of ERG who are doing that, as you said, on top of being a senior programmer or level designers in their job, they're given that time. So we expect them to put on their timesheet, you know, half a day every week to oversee, manage, entertain, regroup the community, and make sure that they have the voice. So our CEO is also allocating time to meet with every ERG every quarter. So every ERGs get to meet the president every quarter, and that's timed on his agenda. That is very important as well.
Sunny, do you want to add something?
I can borrow your mic. First, at the scale we operate, we need systems to be able to do it right. So at the arrival, when students join us, they join us as employee. We don't do things for free. We pay people coming in, and this is one of the first things we have to focus on, make sure that the paycheck will come, because folks have basic needs and they need to be covered. But usually we'll have a session with all the new students every season to tell them what is the place, what are the services that are in place that are available to them, what they should expect from their supervisor and manager, and what is their recourse if they get left alone. Because if it's summer, you may have people in vacancy, in holidays and all this, and sometimes it's more difficult to give them the attention and the love that they should get when they are coming in, but make sure they understand what they get. There will be an exit process as well, so to try to get the feedback. In between, like I said, we have this Agora network, which is championed by 2 senior executives, to really create a space for the young people, the students, to come together and do a number of things together. In the meantime, we have been very clear about what we expect manager and supervisor to do, because these people, while they are getting an experience, they are also contributing to the organization. So they need to treat the newcomers as they will treat their employee, but of course with a bit more attention to make sure they are well equipped, they are supported. The recent past with the virtual work made me really nervous that we would be leaving people alone in their basement and that it will not be part of the team. The stats we got did not show that this was happening, in fact, and maybe we were doing even better because everybody was a bit isolated. So, but not like Francis, we haven't said this is the time you have. We assume that this is something that is built in. The fact that we have that recurring year after year with a certain number, and we are starving to attract talent. I think I never heard anybody complaining that it was a burden on them. I think they all feel it's a good investment. And while we have targets, we don't necessarily say it has to be in that unit. Maybe this manager is overburdened and it's not the time to welcome someone in the team, but within the sector, they can find where it's relevant and good to bring a group of students. And a large number of them stay with us or come back with us after. So I think their experience is good, but it's likely not perfect. Like I said before, always be suspicious. I think I'm always happy, but I'm never satisfied. So better to check again and again that their experience is good. The numbers are positive, but I think we are fighting for talent. And we need to make sure that folks understand. I think if I wanted as a student, I would know what to do, expect to go to Ubisoft. If I'm a student, I just don't know why I would go to Shared Service Canada. Why would be going to the federal government and do something that might be really obscure? Well, if you come to work with us, I need to advertise what you will be touching. You will be helping Environment Canada to prevent, or at least not prevent, but identify Fiona hitting the East Coast because you're managing the supercomputer there. You will be helping the RCMP to deploy telecommunication system across Canada from the south to the north so they can act and react and deal with it. You will be helping our activity internationally, so our embassies are connected all the time with us. So you're touching very cool stuff. So we don't do a really good job to advertise that. So this is something that having more students coming, having Nargis, having others like that, they can explain to their colleague, you want to do these cool things, go there. It's not like as sexy as Ubisoft because it's less visual, less available to everybody. Your mother, your father, your family will not understand what you do there, but you may have a lot of fun if you're interested by these tools. So we need to do a good job, and those are our ambassadors for the future. So long answer to a short question.
I think you got the sales pitch for sure.
I can reassure you, Suni, the father and mothers of our employees don't understand either. So.
Listen, we're up against the hour here, and just before thanking the panelists and closing off, I noticed there's one really pertinent comment in the Q&A. We've been talking a lot about beat the odds and underrepresented groups, and the reality is, of course, many of us around the table aren't embodying underrepresentation or marginalization very well. So if you didn't think there was more work to do in this area, note to self, we also have work to do in this area. So thank you for that observation. But now it's really my pleasure to oh, great. So before they investigate the fire alarm, let me take the moment to ask everybody to thank all of the panelists. It's been a really stimulating hour and a half. Thank you all so much. And please join me in giving our panelists a hand. And with that, I think we probably have to leave anyway.
Okay,
so
thank you so much. We're going to close it up. If you'd like to find an exit, please do that. Thank you.